Hi, welcome to a very special episode of Everyday Ghalib. Viewers will know that this is a series in which we have been taking shares or couplets of the poet Mirza Ghalib, and then we think with those couplets on our contemporary social and political realities. The couplets come from a book, Thinking with Ghalib, and today we are joined by my co-author, Professor Anjum Altaf, who is based in Lahore. Anjum, very much welcome to you on the show.
Thank you, Amit. It's good to be here.
It's indeed wonderful to be speaking with Anjum because it is really with Anjum's work over the years that the book Thinking with Ghalib and therefore all of these videos have really come into existence. So today we are going to talk to him a little bit about his own thinking on why Ghalib is relevant for our times. We are also doing this episode on occasion of Ghalib's death anniversary on 15th of February. So that's another just excuse really to talk about the man and his poetry and why it keeps drawing us back in. So let me start, Anjum, by asking you how you chanced upon the particular way in which Ghalib's poetry has been discussed in this book, which I think wherever I have spoken about it or spoken to people about the book, they are struck by the style and how it speaks in a very different way about Ghalib's poetry. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. Amit, Ghalib is a name that I feel most people in the subcontinent are familiar with in one way or another. People who've gone to college would have encountered the name. People who have seen movies would have come across, something from Ghalib. People who listen to music would have heard something by Ghalib. So it's a name that a lot of people are familiar with, even though they might not have read anything by Ghalib. So Ghalib is in the same category as names like Plato and Aristotle and Shakespeare and Milton. One is familiar with the name, but one might not have read anything in particular. So, given that Ghalib's name is such a that kind of a name, it's natural to be attracted to Ghalib, to find out why is this name all over the place. So I was attracted to Ghalib in the same way like many others. To begin with, for the aesthetic pleasure of the poetry, and then also over time as a kind of a challenge, to figure out what is it that this poetry is trying to say. It's like a mind game. I mean, it's full of meaning. It's not obvious at first glance. So almost like a video game, it becomes a challenge. What is it that so like many people, I was interacting with Ghalib at that level. And then just, out of the blue, a coincidence, I read an op-ed by Professor Stanley Fish, who is a Milton scholar, on Milton's 400th birthday, and in which he said that he could just use one poem from Milton, Paradise Lost, to get undergraduates to engage with all the big questions of life. Who are we? Why are we here? Why did God make Satan? Are men superior to women? What is the purpose of life? All sorts of questions he could get students hooked onto trying to grapple with them. And he makes the point, he says that even students who came in wanting to take the class as, filling in some requirement, within a few weeks they were, kind of fully engaged. So it immediately struck me that with Ghalib, we had a very similar kind of resource, and that while we enjoy Ghalib, we could also put him to use to get our students to grapple with the same big issues. And it sort of resonated with me even more because we don't have that kind of tradition that encourages critical thinking in our educational institutions that are now over time have transitioned much more to the STEM subjects, giving up literature. So we don't have, let's say, the equivalent of a course on Paradise Lost or a course on Shakespeare, a full semester length course. We don't have that. So that's where the idea started to germinate in my mind, that we could do something with Ghalib, and more so because Ghalib is rooted in our own tradition. He uses language and metaphor that is already familiar to us, a background that we don't have to struggle with. We could read Milton, but there is a lot that is assumed. So that is how this journey began.
This is, I think there are a few different things that you've said that would be really worth talking about a little more. There's this idea that I think that many people have, even when they haven't read, as you said, the greats, so to speak. And in fact, in the US, you even have things like these great books, courses, and so forth, right, where they're trying to very deliberately construct this canon of people that you're thinking with. Now, for us in South Asia, do you think that Ghalib can perform a role which perhaps, maybe this book is a kind of an attempt to start that, a role of the beginning of such a canon, if you will, which doesn't necessarily only have to have great men or anything like that. It can be chosen in so many different ways, but very deliberately trying to use these resources, which perhaps so far have only been largely aesthetically and so forth appreciated, but for a very explicit pedagogical purpose. Do you think that this fits into a larger program? Maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, and then we'll come back to what specifically it is about Ghalib that makes him really amenable to this kind of an experiment.
Amit, I very much believe that. I think that there is a great need for that, to use our own resources to trigger this kind of engagement with our society, with our time. And there are kind of various resources that we have, that we can call upon, and engaging with society at different levels. For instance, we have somebody like Kabir, for instance, who's engaging with society at a very popular level, and so Bulle Shah and just fall in that category. And then we have somebody like Ghalib, who is engaging with it at a fairly intellectual level, with a different segment of society. So these are invaluable treasures that are lying around, and to me, I'm surprised that we haven't been using them in the same way as Milton and Shakespeare and Plato and Aristotle. People are still, after 2,000 years, still thinking about what they said, and reinterpreting them depending on the context. I mean, these people are great because they're asking universal questions that don't go away. It's just that our context changes, and we engage with them again. So I'm very much in favor of using these to examine our society and to get closer to it. Yeah.
Right. So you've mentioned Kabir, you've mentioned Bulle Shah, and when one reads Ghalib, definitely as one becomes more familiar with his poetry, one encounters many ideas that are very similar to the Sufi and the Bhakti poets from all over the subcontinent. Really, I mean, we have these figures stretching all the way, across modern India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. You will find, regional, many languages and people saying very similar things. So there's immense scope. I think I entirely agree with you in designing almost, I think, perhaps more than a course, perhaps a sequence of courses. For example, in Azim Premji University here, we have these sequence called Understanding India, which is a common curriculum that all majors take, regardless of whatever else they may be doing. And one can imagine a course such as this taught almost entirely, I think, through such texts. But let's come to Ghalib in particular. I want to see if there was ever any moment. You described the Milton moment, for example, when you read that op-ed and it struck you that this use was possible. But from Ghalib, from reading him, any verse that you remember reading, any shair that really got you drawn into that aspect a lot more? So the aesthetics took a back seat maybe, and you said, okay, this is a remarkable 2 lines here that I have in front of me, and I could do so much with this if I was speaking to young people about them, then I could use them in such an effective way. Do you ever recall there being any such specific moment or a specific couplet that comes to mind?
Amit, before I answer that question, let me say a little bit more about what we just talked about. This is an interesting fact that people don't know, that the most selling poet in the United States is Rumi. Right? And it is precisely because of the reason that we were talking about, that there is so much wisdom in that poetry. So it's the irony that a poet that we should be very close to is being read so avidly for the wisdom that is contained in the poetry. On Ghalib, there are once this what you call the Milton moment set me on a different path, a different way of looking at Ghalib. It was then that I discovered that Ghalib was much more than a poet, and I recalled that couplet then, पूछते हैं वो कि गालिब कौन है, कोई बतलाओ कि हम बतलाएं क्या. So they ask, who is Ghalib? Tell me, what should I tell them? So then I discovered that Ghalib was not really a poet first. I mean, he's a philosopher who is expressing his philosophy in the form of poetry, which makes him very, very unique, because he's expressing these very profound ideas in about 12 words and very accessible language. It's the same philosophy that you get from Plato or Aristotle or Kant or Hegel, but to understand that you have to be a real scholar. And here this philosophy, this thinking, this challenging of orthodoxy is, is so accessible to us. So then I discovered that Ghalib was a philosopher expressing his thoughts in poetry, but he was then so much more than that. He's a fantastic correspondent whose letters are still being read, that change the style in which we communicate. He's a historian who's probably written the most vivid account of the 1857 event, because he was there. He was, he was involved in seeing it very close, to the point that his own brother was, murdered in or shot in that episode. So he's a secularist. If you read his Masnavi written in Banaras, you'll be amazed at the kind of thoughts that he was expressing at that time. He was, although he was not a scientist, but he had a scientific mind, which is very, very impressive for a person coming out of that milieu. He says, "Sabza o gul kahan se aaye hain? Abr kya cheez hai? Hawa kya hai?" It's a very scientific mind. And then the most impressive thing was that here is a man who is sitting right on the cusp of two worldviews. He's coming out of this feudal world, this world of monarchy, and seeing the new world that was emerging with the British. So he goes to Calcutta, and he sees, and what is most impressive is that despite the harrowing time that he went through in the 1857 with his family issues, his brother, he's not bitter. He's still willing to imbibe or to see what's coming and how to adapt with it. And he is still remains a very witty person. It's very impressive. So whenever I read this couplet, ईमा मुझे रोके है तो खींचे है मुझे कुफ्र, काबा मेरे पीछे है, कलीसा मेरे आगे. It is so impressive for a man who's saying, well, this was in the past and here is the future, and the past is holding me back, but I can see what's coming. It just makes you, shake your head and say, wow, this is incredible. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit on many, many themes, and perhaps you could go on for a long time. But I just wanted to, one of the things you talked about, which was wit and mischievousness and so forth, the shokhi, as we call it, is in so many of even his serious couplets, he says things in a way, and we have some of those in our book too. One of them that is not in the book, but I was reminded when you mentioned the wit, is गालिब बुरा न मान जो वाइज बुरा कहे, ऐसा भी कोई है कि सब अच्छा कहे जिसे.
Right.
So he's so casually sort of undermining the position of all of these authority figures in this way, and in this age, when we are well, it's almost like in every age one has to produce these people who will remind us that being human and relating to each other takes primacy over these constructs and these authorities that we give to people, and the structures that we build for ourselves, and the boxes that we put ourselves in or put each other in. We need people periodically to remind us that that is what you're doing, that you're putting yourself in these boxes, and really you are much more than that. The couplets that are there in the book, such as the one on the Brahmin and the Kaaba, or the blowing the conch in the Kaaba, and then wearing that holy cloak in the temple, and so forth. He's really constantly, through his wit, and in his provoking us in a way to go beyond that. And I have to say that it was some of these I was also familiar with earlier, but only when I sort of started talking to you and saw them in this light of this particular approach that you are trying to do, is when I really realized how much of it there is in him, in a way. Because as often happens, the aesthetics and so forth, you get so drawn in on that sometimes you forget that really, as you said, what he's trying to do is this very specific project. I do want to, staying on Ghalib, and you mentioned about the philosophy. Of course, when one talks about philosophy and poetry, the tradition has so many people. Iqbal, of course, immediately comes to mind after Ghalib, and Bedil comes to mind before Ghalib, and there's a connection between Bedil and Ghalib. What do you think in your mind? There's something that sets him apart as a poet philosopher among all these great poet philosophers?
Amit, I think that for me at least, what makes Ghalib unique is, it's in a sense, Stanley Fish, we mentioned earlier, he also made this point. After going through what he was doing with Milton, he talks about Shakespeare. And so I've written down what he said because I really liked it. He says that Shakespeare is also great, but in a different way. And then this is a quote from him. He says, after reading Shakespeare, you want to sit down and discuss the glories of Shakespeare. But after reading Milton, you want to sit down with the ideas that he thrusts at you. So what makes Ghalib unique is that he has these questions that he's throwing at you, and he's leaving you to grapple with them. He's not didactic in that sense that he's not telling you what is good for you. And for me, that is a very, very unique attribute that I haven't found in most other poets that I have read. And that is so exciting because, as Francis Pritchett has said, Ghalib is the meaning machine. There are just so many layers, and you can read it one way and come up with the different answers. So he just leaves you thinking about the big issues. And it is surprising that, when we were doing this book, we realized how close they are to the society that we live in. I mean, it's not that, Ghalib's time is over. Ghalib is very much with us, he said. So, he says, हुई मुद्दत पे गालिब मर गया पर याद आता है वो हर एक बात पे कहना कि यूं होता तो क्या होता, right? So that is always with us. We ask, we can find the meaning in our life just, reading and thinking about Ghalib. And it's a resource that, we can leave it aside and not do anything with it. And so Ghalib says, Ghalib khasta ke baghair kaun se kaam band hai? Roiye zar zar kya kijiye hai hai kyun. So it's up to us. But if we grapple with it, if we engage with Ghalib, it just opens up. To me, the image that comes in is, those buffaloes around the water wheel that have these blinders on their eyes and they keep on going round and round. Sometimes I feel that that's the way we are living. We are born, we go to school, we get married, have children and die. But once you take those blinders off, it's a completely different world, And you go back to Socrates, who said the unexamined life is not worth living. And Ghalib helps us to examine life and makes so much sense of what is happening to us today. We have this couplet that you mentioned, the way he challenges orthodoxy. We are being asked to believe in something. We are being, given a meta narrative, and he just in 12 words says, "Kabe mein ja bajayenge nakus." Ab to banda hai dehar mein aram. He just turns it completely on its head. So it's an invitation to think that we would be really, foolish to throw away. He describes it himself as very correctly, his writing as a Ganjina e Gohar, It's a treasure house of pearls, So it's
Absolutely. Well, before we run out of time, I also want to talk a little bit about the book itself and its reception. It's been a while since it's been out, both in Pakistan and in India, and I have been, talking about it in a few places here, and then so have you, across the border. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our experience, taking the book, as it were, to places. And I'll just say briefly that wherever I have spoken about it, of course, people turn up. The Ghalib's name is always a crowd puller in that sense, that you have a session and he's there. Some people will come, but I've really seen how perhaps what you started with, in the motivation, that introduce in a different side of him and talk about things that may not get talked about in a session of Ghalib. People come in with certain expectations. Even recently, I was asked at an event, how come Dile Nadan is not in your book? Because when you talk about Ghalib, you talk about Dile Nadan. Tujhe hua kya hai? So people have all these expectations. You're going to talk about these things, and we don't do that. The couplets are often unfamiliar, and then they are used in a way that is very, very unfamiliar, to the point where some people might even feel a little offended. Why are you bringing in foreign aid and development discourse into a book on Ghalib, which is done, and which I really find an enjoyable part of it. So I want to reflect on your own experiences in this respect, but also in the kind of times that we live in, and talking about these ideas today. What has been your experience?
Amit, you recall those words from Keats, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. It will never fade into nothingness. So Ghalib's poetry is a thing of beauty, and it will last forever. But it is also full of wisdom, which means that it will stay relevant also forever. And in selecting the couplets that we did end up, you had a big hand in picking the couplets, and I don't know, something must have been at the back of our minds when we were doing that selection, that we have sort of picked the couplets that speak to our predicament at this time. There are a lot of commentaries on the love poetry, and Ghalib, that has been done many times before. But this kind of putting Ghalib to use, as I said earlier, requires selecting a different kind of a couplet that speaks to events, that speaks to our life, our lived reality, through which we want to make the point that we can't put Ghalib on a pedestal as a great. We have to make use of Ghalib. So this is a kind of a utilitarian approach. Maybe, I don't know, maybe because we are economists, we felt that way, but that's the logic behind the selection. And the sense I get from talking to people that it has touched a nerve. It's new. It's different, and You know, I feel that, you know, to me, life has three dimensions. You know, there's the dimension, the physical dimension, the spiritual dimension, and the intellectual dimension. And in the physical dimension, people have now discovered how important it is to keep themselves in good shape. Otherwise, their muscles atrophy. You know, people pay a lot to go to gyms, and on the spiritual, they go to various places of pilgrimage and spend money. But we still haven't really thought seriously that our mental faculties also decay and decline if we don't use them. And I think with this book, we are offering something with a few hundred rupees and a couple of hours of reading that can, at least a lot of people are saying, yes, it made a difference to my life. You know, I see life differently. So I'm happy with the reaction. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I've been encouraged by the young people reacting positively to it, in our university, but also in other places. One last thing I also wanted to say was that this is now going away from the book, and just the fact that we got a chance to work with each other. I of course say in every event that I attend that we haven't actually met in person yet, and people are always struck by that. And somehow that doesn't seem a huge deal, and people seem to think it is a much bigger deal than I feel it. Of course, I feel bad that we haven't ever met, and I hope that we soon do. But the way it has been possible to do this through technology, and for people finding each other through shared interests and trying to do something together, I really feel quite hopeful. That a lot more such things can be done by many more people. If we just make it a little bit easier for people to find each other and do these things. So I wanted to get your take on that. Just as if you reflect back on just this aspect of this journey, what are your thoughts on that, and your hopes for the future?
Amit, to be honest, as much as I enjoyed putting this book together, uh, it was equally enjoyable to work with you. I really appreciated the fact that we could build on a shared interest, that we can produce something that jointly. And this is something that I have been interested in for a very long time. I think I started my blog maybe now close to 15 years back. It's called The South Asian Idea. And if you read it, it is just full of interactions in the commentary sections between people from across the border. And I take real pride in the fact that there is a real, a very civil discourse in which people are talking about very difficult issues, but in a manner in which they're learning from each other. There are always some people who know more, some people who know less, some people who enter in with completely mistaken ideas, simply because this border has been so hard that we haven't had an opportunity to travel, we haven't had an opportunity to meet. There's so much false news circulating that it is imperative that we try and do things to work together, to interact together, and hopefully this will set a trend.
Absolutely, and I should say that so that our viewers know that the South Asian Idea has been around for a very long time, has done some excellent work, covering so many different issues. You yourself have written extensively on education in Pakistan at all levels. You've of course also obviously been a participant in the system. You've taught in universities in Pakistan and abroad. So you're bringing a lot of practical experience of engagement with young people and with the education process when you talk about these things, and through your interests, other interests in Hindustani music and other things, you've really, if I may say so, tried to live the South Asian idea. in your own life as well, which is such a beautiful thing really to see. And I would encourage our viewers to look up the blog as well as to find out more about you and look up your books and so forth. I do, we really should be ending. I want to come back to our person at hand here, Ghalib, and maybe share an anecdote each of his, perhaps from his life, just to kind of leave readers with Ghalib's personal life and how he lived his ideas, perhaps. So any anecdote that you've encountered of his that stayed with you, incident from his life or what he said on any occasion that you wanted to share, please do, and I'll also think of something similar to share.
Amit, there are so many things to share about Ghalib, but I think going back to his wit, I mean, one can't think enough of what an amazing sense of humor he had. So this incident about the month of Ramadan and fasting, when somebody asked him, how many fasts did you keep this time? And he said, "Ek na rakha." So which you can interpret in both ways.
Right. Ek na rakha, ek bhi nahi rakha, ya ek hi nahi rakha, and leaves it open for you.
Right.
Yeah, in some tellings of this story, I think his interlocutor is Bahadur Shah Zafar, and it often makes me think, I don't know if it really was the case or not, but it's almost like an Akbar Birbal echo, is it not? You can imagine the emperor and this wit sort of talking to each other, and the wit saying something, making you think. No, absolutely. And there's so many really witty ones to choose from. But I wanted to talk about one. This is not so much the wit, but it gives you a sense of his world. And in one of his letters to his student, I think it is Hargopal Tufta that he's writes to frequently, and he's complaining that he hasn't written to him in a while, and the way he complains, it's so touching. He says that I don't go anywhere now. I'm an old man, and these letters are my visitors. So तुम्हारा खत नहीं आया यानी तुम नहीं आए, तो खत लिखो और ना लिखने की वजह लिखो. So he's so endearing that it's as if you haven't come and visited me, and every time a letter comes, I feel like you are coming. So it's a beautiful kind of sentiment. So let's end this. I want to just get your sense on if you've seen any of the videos that we've been doing on Everyday Ghalib as a series, and Everyday Ghalib is a name that our excellent media person here, Shashwat, came up with actually. Do you have any suggestions for us, maybe how to do things differently, or your reactions? That would be nice to know.
Amit, I've seen I think almost all the episodes that have been put out on the net, and I've really appreciated them. I think that both of you are doing an excellent job. This is quite the way to introduce each couplet, one couplet at a time, and talk about it. My only suggestion would be that maybe when this is all packaged at the end, there could be some kind of a thematic linking of the couplets. Even without that, they're fine. I mean, if they are available independently, they should be fine. But if you can draw some linkage, I think that might be worth considering.
Sure, definitely do that. Thank you, Anjum. It was, of course, as always, it's a fantastic pleasure to talk to you, and all the more so now because we are doing it for camera, as it were. So, thank you for giving us your time. And I invite our readers our viewers to also look at the Everyday Ghalib video series. They have some more coming up now after this one, which is the introduction to the second season, as it were. So please do check them out on our YouTube channel, Azim Premji University. Thanks, Anjum, for joining us.
Thanks, Amit. As always, it's been wonderful to talk to you, and hope we'll have more opportunities in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.